Ora turnaround plan. As you know, this is a very important Crown entity, has assets of $47 billion, expenditure of $2.5 billion per year, owns 75,000 houses around the country. It's New Zealand's biggest landlord. The previous government poured billions of dollars into Kāinga Ora. Debt on its balance sheet rose from $2.3 billion in 2017-18 to $16.5 billion in 23-24. Deficits grew from $76 million in 2017-18 to a deficit of $568 million in 2023-2024. One of the first things we did upon coming to government was commission an independent review by Sir Bill English, which found in May 2024 two major things. Firstly, that the agency was underperforming and not financially viable without significant savings. And secondly, that the wider social housing system wasn't delivering the results that New Zealanders need and deserve. We then appointed a refresh board led by Simon Muta, who's here with me today as chair. We asked them to deliver a turnaround plan by the end of last year. I can announce today that Cabinet has considered that plan, and we are releasing the plan today, and I'd like to take you through a few high-level comments on it. The turnaround plan refocuses Kāinga Ora on its core purpose of being a good social landlord and improving its operating performance, reducing losses and capping debt at an acceptable level. There are 5 major components to the plan. The first is to refocus on its core mission, building and maintaining and managing social housing and being a supportive but firm landlord. Secondly, improving the organisational performance, a focus on cost effectiveness, reducing high overheads and leveraging buying power more effectively. Thirdly, improved tenant and community management. Fourthly, improved housing portfolio and build management, better managing the existing assets and building or renewing homes as efficiently as the market, including simplifying social housing building specifications and using all available building delivery channels. And fifthly, a more persistent and sustainable approach to funding and associated settings. The previous government's funding for new social houses finished in June 2025, one of these so-called fiscal cliffs that the coalition government has had to confront. Kāinga Ora is currently funded to deliver around 2,650 houses around New Zealand through to 2026, and the government has also funded an additional 1,500 further social houses to be delivered by community housing providers from June 2025 onwards. That was part of Budget 2024 when we closed the First Home Grant Scheme to put the money into further social houses. The Kāinga Ora turnaround plan means that from 2026-7 onwards, Kāinga Ora will be involved in around 1,900 to 2,000 construction events per year, made up of approximately 1,500 new build homes and 400 retrofits of existing homes. This will be offset by demolitions associated with redevelopment activities and sales of around 900 homes per year. What we're going to achieve is a steady state, which means the number of Kāinga Ora homes does not reduce over time, but that the money raised from the sales can be reinvested in new, warmer, drier homes in areas of demand and areas where they are needed. The advice from Simon and the Refresh Board is that Kāinga Ora has been building houses for approximately 12% more than market comparisons. The turnaround plan we're releasing commits Kāinga Ora to delivering new builds at fully allocated costs that are in line with or better than market rates. Ministers have been really clear that Kāinga Ora should be building or acquiring simple, functional, warm and dry houses as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Another part of the plan is to narrow the scope of what Kāinga Ora does. The previous government gave them an enormous number of tasks, everything from managing infrastructure funds, large-scale urban development, Kiwi Build underwrites, first home grants, a whole range of different things. So we are taking Kāinga Ora back to basics. Cabinet has agreed that residual Kiwi Build underwrite activity will be transferred to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. Administration of the Infrastructure Acceleration Fund will transfer to the new National Infrastructure Funding and Financing Agency, and the Kāinga Ora Land Program will be progressively wound down. We will also progress legislation this year to amend the Kāinga Ora Homes and Communities Act. The impact of this plan is a net reduction in deficits of around 190 million in this financial year, and Kāinga Ora is making good progress already, with a reduction in the deficit in 2027-8, or forecast reduction, of 354 million compared to the 2023 pre-election economic and fiscal update. Debt is forecast to be $1.8 billion lower in 27-28 compared to the 2023 pre-FU numbers. So you can see that the impact of this plan makes a material difference on the sustainability of Kāinga Ora and a material difference on the Crown books. This is a good plan. Ministers have been impressed by the new board's ability and the new executive team's ability at Kāinga Ora to work their way through a complicated series of issues. And I want to close off by thanking Simon and the board for delivering this plan that Cabinet is proud to endorse. This is a plan to get Kāinga Ora back on track. It's a plan to return it to financial sustainability, and it's a balanced plan that means that we can continue to invest in new, warm, dry homes for New Zealanders, and very critically also look after the very aged stock that Kāinga Ora has. A lot of 1940s and 1950s homes out there around the country that we can continue to retrofit and invest in to bring them up to spec over time. It's a balanced plan, it's the right plan for Kāinga Ora, and it's the right plan for New Zealand. Simon's now going to make a few comments, and then we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Minister, and good morning, everyone. Really nice to be having this conversation in front of this brand new little complex behind us, which has just been released to market, built on time and $1 million under budget. So, terrific addition to the social housing stock here in Honeyhanga. Today is a pivotal point for Kāinga Ora, and I too would like to first pause and thank my board colleagues and the management team for the just enormous amount of work that went into to designing this plan and getting it all worked out in the second half of last year. As the Minister has noted, the agency has come through a period of very significant growth over the last 5 years, having delivered over 13,000 new homes and completely refurbished 3,400 homes all across the country. Unfortunately, some of that growth has happened in an unsustainable way, and so we are turning the focus back now to the core mission of providing and managing state-owned social housing and reducing the construction volumes so that we can ensure long-term financial sustainability. Look, by far the biggest driver of financial performance and the level of the debt in the organisation is the volume of construction activity that we carry out each year. So the new plan does see these volumes step down over the current and next financial year, and we will stabilise at around 1,900 to 2,000 construction events per year, and that'll be focused on a steadily paced renewal of our older stock. From mid-2026 onwards, the total number of homes we own will stabilise at around 78,000, unless, of course, the Minister instructs Kāinga Ora to add to our housing stock beyond that date. And for the sake of clarity, I'd reiterate the Minister's message that Kāinga Ora will continue to deliver new social housing to either add to the housing stock in places where more homes are needed, or to replace existing homes that have reached their end of life. We'll also be targeting reduced unit building costs and using a wider range of sourcing and replacement options funded by more sales of unsuitable stock, and by all those means we aim to keep the growth in the debt to well within the level requested by the Minister of Finance. We're also going to materially improve operational performance and at the same time reduce operating costs by going back to basics, concentrating our resources on just being a responsible landlord that looks after our homes and tenants and serves our communities well. We house around 190,000 New Zealanders. We're the country's biggest landlord by far, and improving tenancy management is a key focus for us. And one of our more important initiatives will be to better understand and segment our tenant base so that we can provide more targeted and cost-effective support to them. As the Minister noted, our frontline teams are already making good use of the Residential Tenancies Act to get better outcomes for our tenants and communities. We will support tenants when they're going through tough times, but rent must be paid and tenants must treat their neighbours with respect. And if they don't meet those obligations, they will be putting their tenancy at risk. Internally, Kāinga Ora is taking a more disciplined approach to spending and reducing costs wherever possible. We have set up a transformation office already to guide the organisation through the necessary changes to put effect to this over the coming year. The board has set very clear expectations that it wants to see value for money for every dollar spent, and the CEO and his leadership team are responding very strongly to that direction. As key cost savings are embedded, Kāinga Ora's financial sustainability will significantly improve with the aim of materially reducing the operating deficit and eliminating it within 10 years or so. New Zealand has a proud history of providing social housing to people in need, and Kāinga Ora is committed to continuing that legacy, but in a financially sustainable way. My board is up for the challenge, and we're confident that this plan, well executed, will make a big difference. And we will regularly and transparently report our progress. So I'm confident by the end of this year, Kāinga Ora will be well down the path of becoming a government agency that Kiwis can be proud of. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon.
Minister, 1,900 houses in the renewables and retrofits, minus 700 500 for the demolitions. Are you only going to have 700 new houses built this year? That's 1,900.
I'm just looking at your maths, Katie. Indeed. What we're doing is taking a balanced approach to getting Kāinga Ora's debt and deficits under control and making sure that the net number of social houses stays roughly the same once the build volumes peak at around 78,000 in a couple of years' time or so, and the sales will allow us to invest, or allow Kāinga Ora to invest in bringing up to standard some of the older stock in the country, much of it from the 1940s and 50s that is in need of investment and frankly hasn't had the maintenance required over many years. The sales program will also allow Kāinga Ora to invest in new housing in areas of high demand where it's needed. And one of the things that is quite interesting about the social housing funding system is we're not particularly deliberate and targeted at what we build and where we build it. And this has been particularly the case over the last 5 years, where Kāinga Ora was given huge amounts of money and asked to go on a building spree, and that did produce quite a lot of houses. Of that there is no doubt. Much of them at high cost, and some of them in the wrong place. And so we are going to be much more deliberate and targeted around where we build and what we build. To give you some numbers to put that into context, 50% of people on the social housing wait list, which is about 20,000 applicants, so 50% of that, so that's 10,000 applicants, need a one-bedroom house. Kāinga Ora's stock is about 12% one bedroom. So there is a real mismatch between what is required in terms of demand for social housing and what we actually own. And so getting that getting to grips with that is really important. To give you another example, Kāinga Ora owns around 200 houses worth more than $2 million each in Auckland. Most of them are in Auckland. There's a few in other pockets of the country, but Kāinga Ora owns around 200 houses worth over $2 million each. Frankly, a much better use of that money and the Crown capital is to divest from some of those high-cost, high-value homes in areas of Auckland where those houses exist, and reinvest that money in denser, more low-cost, affordable, often denser environments and typologies in parts of Auckland and indeed other parts of the country where there is greater demand. I think most New Zealanders would say it doesn't make a lot of sense for Kāinga Ora to own $2 million houses in Remuera, for example. They should be investing those houses, investing that money in places where the need is greatest, which is not Remuera, by the way. It is other parts of the country and indeed other parts of Auckland. So the plan allows Kāinga Ora to do that, and New Zealanders will see that happen over time. It's not going to happen immediately, and it's not going to be a fire sale, but there will be divestment of houses around the country, as I say, high value areas where the money can be redeployed elsewhere, or just simply where the houses have come to the end of their life and it's more economic to sell or demolish and sell rather than upgrade them, because there does come a point at which that there's just no point in continuing to hold the asset. By the way, this is not new. The Labour Party says that they stopped the State House sell-off. They didn't. Kāinga Ora has sold houses every year for the last 5 years. Small numbers, sure, but Kāinga Ora already does exactly what I'm talking about. What we're doing is accelerating that process because we think it makes sense.
Back to my question though, 20,000 people in the emergency state housing waiting list, and now we're going to 700,000.
Yeah, but the answer to reducing the social housing wait list is partly social housing, but it's also a function of the wider housing market. And it's really important to understand that. The wait list is a measure of people who classified by the Ministry of Social Development as in severe and urgent need of housing. They're essentially housing deprived, okay? Some of those people will end up in a social house, but some of those people will potentially end up in private rentals. 50% of people on the social housing wait list are in a private rental already. So I think there's a perception out there that people on the wait list are not in housing. 50% of them are in private rentals already, which suggests that the most important thing we can do as a government is fix the wider housing market, because the social housing wait list is a function largely of rental distress. It's people who simply don't have enough take-home pay at the end of every week or fortnight or month to pay their rent, or they pay their rent but they struggle to pay their rent, and that comes at the risk of other things. So the best thing we can do is the government's wider housing plan, which is called Going for Housing Growth, which aims to unlock limits inside our cities, density limits and restrictions on greenfield sites at the edge of our cities, and sort the infrastructure settings out that make it hard to build housing in New Zealand. If we go on a building spree over the next 10 to 15 years, we can materially reduce rents, and that will have the biggest impact on the social housing wait list. Now, there will always be people in housing need, of that there is no doubt. There will always be people in the private rental market who can't afford market rents, even with the accommodation supplement, which the government provides as well, and that's why social housing is really important. There will always be prisoners leaving prison who can't afford the private rental market, who need support. There will always be vulnerable New Zealanders for a range of reasons, with a range of different health requirements, with a range of different socioeconomic characteristics that mean that they need support, and the state will always be there for them. And actually, that is why the work that Matt and Simon and the team do at Kāinga Ora is so very important. And one of the things that has distressed me about the last few years is that the social licence for social housing has been lost because the organisation has been off track. And so we are trying to rebuild the licence for social housing so that when Kāinga Ora turns up in a neighbourhood and says, we're building some new social houses, New Zealanders don't react with dismay and hostility and say, clear off, which is what happens too often at the moment. Instead, they say, great, this is a well-run organisation. They build at or below what the market would provide. They build warm, dry, functional houses for people in need, and they look after their tenants properly, and I'm welcoming them to my neighbourhood. That's what I want for Kāinga Ora, and that's what I want for New Zealand, and that's what this plan will provide.
Kāinga Ora is no longer going to be part of that building spree you talk about. They're no longer going to address this supply-side problem in building.
No, they'll continue to build. They'll continue to build social houses.
They're going to keep at the same level.
Well, they will continue, but there'll be building going on around the country. There'll be about 1,900 to 2,000 construction events per year, 1,500 new build homes, be retrofits of existing homes. We do need more homes. We do need more homes, but 93-94% of the building going on in New Zealand is delivered by the private sector. It's not by Kāinga Ora. They're a part of the mix when it comes to new builds, but when it comes to private sector building, that is the vast bulk of building in New Zealand. And so we need, you've all heard me wax lyrical about this before. We need more greenfields, we need more density, we need more medium density, we need more high density, we need more apartments by train stations, we need more terraced housing, we need more small bedroom units, we need more granny flats, or minor residential units as they're sometimes called. We need all of the above, and we need more social housing.
But this is also not taking into account population growth, is it?
These things are always dynamic, so don't forget that we're also adding to social housing through community housing providers. This is a plan for Kāinga Ora. Well, as we work our way through budget decisions over time, we will work our way through that. I think it's publicly known that we are working our way through the housing funding picture as it is right now. So one of the things that has been interesting to grapple with over the last year as an incoming government, or relatively new incoming government, is the multiplicity of housing funds out there. The government funds everything from Kāinga Ora housing through to community housing, through to the affordable rental scheme, through to large-scale projects, through to urban transformation, through the infrastructure acceleration fund, through to first home grants, through to housing support products delivered by MSD, through the accommodation supplement. All up, we spend about $4 billion a year on housing support, emergency housing, transitional housing as well, which is about $350 million a year. So we spend an enormous sum of money, and what we've been trying to do as a government over the last 12 months or so is get to grips with that and work out how we can drive better value for money from what the Crown spends in terms of social housing, and drive better outcomes for the people from that spending. So that's a work in progress. And once we've made decisions around that, we'll have more to say. But the social housing numbers for community housing providers, and indeed Kāinga Ora, should be viewed within the context of trying to drive better value for money. And by value for money, I refer you back to what I just said before, which is 50% of people on the wait list need a one-bedroom unit. So we are looking much more clearly and deliberately at how we can drive better outcomes from what the government spends in terms of housing.
What happens to the 300 odd projects that were underway or had been planned that are now stalled in land that Kāinga Ora had built? What happens to them?
Well, I might let Matt or Simon speak to that, because it will depend on the particular project.
Yeah, we as we've said many times, working our way through a series of decisions that were around land and particular developments that to determine which ones are going to continue and be required for social housing, and which properties might be sold onto the market. So we expect that work to conclude sort of by the end of the financial year. I think so. So yeah.
So on that question, about 3 blocks that way, just my neighbour just on the run, there's one of Kāinga Ora's largest blocks of land, Jordan Ave. It's been sitting empty, desolate, overgrown for about 2 years now. What are you going to do about that one?
Yeah, so I won't comment on the specific one, but it is part of the review that we're doing. And so once that review is completed, either we will be progressing with development there, or else we'll be selling it onto the market for a property developer to do something with that.
When will there be a decision?
We are making decisions on those by the middle of this year, which is the end of our financial year.
Do you have any apologies to communities that have things like this nzherald as part of the communities?
We're working through this as quickly as we can so that we can bring clarity for the community and either develop it ourselves or get it into the market to do that.
What did you say to the tenants who you threw out of that place 2 years ago when you bulldozed the previous place that were there?
Well, I think at the time that was a logical step with the trajectory that we were building on. As we've looked to both adjust the volumes we're building, but also looking really hard at the numbers and which of these actually make financial sense, we've had to pause. It's unfortunate that that's caused some disruption for the community, and we never like to do that. But it was fiscally prudent and responsible for the community to stop and make sure we could think through this properly. We're doing that as quickly as we can. Sorry?
Is that an apology on behalf of the organisation? Community or to those tenants?
Well, any time we disrupt a community, we don't like it. So you can take that as you like.
That community though, and in that context, those houses that have been built, houses that are desperately needed, and we have seen that across the country with 300 projects, 2 years of those being stalled, land sitting empty, tenants living in those houses. Is that actually...
Well, Kāinga Ora built over, was it 4,500?
Nearly 6,000 construction events in 2024. So
the Labor Party's running this line that all state house building stopped. It hasn't. No. I mean, in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. It's just a lie, frankly. Kāinga Ora built, as the chair says, there were 6,000 construction events last year, and there is more happening in this financial year right now as well. In fact, that stretches out until 2026, and soon I'll be announcing the first round of funds for the community housing sector from houses funded in the budget 2024 as well. So it's just not true what some people are saying. It is definitely true to say that over the last 6 or 7 years there have been instances where Kāinga Ora has purchased land and then done not a lot with that land. Actually, that's been part of the problem that we've been trying to grapple with, and I don't like it either. I know from my own community, for example, in 2017, in fact, I just launched the housing that I'm just about to talk about, I just launched the other day in Apuni. There was a plan to build on that land. The houses were demolished in 2015. A plan was launched in 2017 to build on the land, but they've only just been complete 8 years later. Some of the reasons for that go to council consenting processes, which is another part of the problem, and Kāinga Ora is not immune from that in the way that private developers aren't immune from it either. In fact, one of the things that they've found quite interesting is the Wellington Regional Council's plan in Wellington makes it quite hard for them to build. So we're, as you know, with my RMA reform on hat, we're trying to get to the bottom of the red tape that sometimes makes it hard even for the government to build social houses as well. But I get that people get frustrated when land sits vacant and derelict and there isn't building. But the government in Budget 2023 stopped the funding for new social housing after June 2025. That is the reality. They don't like hearing that, but that is the reality. And they did it to make the books look better in Budget 2026 and beyond. The reality is they left the organisation in a financially perilous position. We have had to grapple with that. I'm not making excuses. We have had to grapple with that. We have got a plan. It will get the organisation back to financial sustainability, and it will get the build pipeline a lot more smoother than what it is at the moment, which is wild oscillations, which is what drives communities nuts, and also actually affects the economics of the organisation as well. Because when you get huge Kāinga Ora building booms driven by government just funneling it money without a lot of accountability, that's what drove up the build costs. And there'd be people around the country who would happily say to you that they knew that when Kāinga Ora came calling with the big government chequebook, the price jumped for building materials and for land and for a whole bunch of other things. And most New Zealanders will have experience of people who've seen that. So we're sort of ending that culture. It's really important. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier in your speech that it was 12% more than market comparisons. Where should it be? I believe.
Well, ministers have made it clear to Kāinga Ora that it should be at or below equivalent market comparisons, and I'll let Matt or Simon talk to how they're going to achieve that.
I'll just touch on one and then I'll ask Matt to explain how we're dealing with that. Yep. But just the one thing that you need to be mindful of with social housing is we don't build it all to the same specification as lower cost private development housing, because in particular we have to take a very long lifetime view, and social housing tenants require some modifications to the house. They have more disabilities or more issues, so a portion of the stock has to be built to a higher standard, and we would use longer, more durable elements because we don't want to be back there in 10 years replacing them. So sort of in concept there are valid reasons where there can be some differences, but we should be able to offset that with the pure scale and the consistent go to market. So the aim is to get to market pricing, knowing that there are some high sides, but leverage our scale to offset those. And it's in the low tens of thousands, depending on the particular unit, on a per unit to do the right requirements for social housing. Not hundreds of thousands. It's a lowish number. But Matt can update you on what we're doing with housing delivery. That I think is very.
So clearly, our ability to build cost effectively is critical to the future of Kāinga Ora, and so the team's been working through, over quite a number of months, a new housing delivery system. We've just enacted the reorganisation that supports that, so that allows us to actually, in a much more predictable, lean manner, be able to build cost effectively. We've looked at the housing specs, the housing topologies, and through that optimisation we've already made big progress on closing that gap to market, and we're committed to getting to that objective of being at market or below, and we do have scale to take advantage of.
Are you going to address the quality of the builds to get those costs down?
No, we're going to make sure we've got the right fit build for what our tenants need, and with a 60 to 70 year life, making sure that we've got the right same quality. Quite a lot of it's actually just looking at optimising topologies and looking at the configurations, so we're confident that we can provide safe, warm, appropriately sized and fitted out homes for what our tenants need.
It's just a matter of making them smaller?
No, often it's actually just if you change the configuration, it's the same floor area, but it's just a much more efficient build process for the topology it's on. Right. So we're not having smaller houses all over the place, it's actually just configuring them more properly and then making sure that we've got more repeatable, efficient and scalable, that we can dial up and down build processes through our housing delivery system.
What would it cost to get to 12% over the average price, given you need to take into account construction cost inflation, right, which was close to 12% at some points.
No, it's taking into account that.
You take it, yeah. So how did those costs get to be so much more, also given the fact that Kāinga Ora should have been able to buy in bulk materials?
Yeah, I think the core of it was actually scaling up as rapidly as Kāinga Ora did, and it's impressive what they did there, but they scaled that up and the unit costs kind of just got a little bit away from where they need to be. So we're now into a period of actually make that repeatable and just drive the efficiencies to make sure we can get to market. So I think that was the primary driver. There was probably also some bells and whistles that maybe were a little bit beyond what was needed, but we're not taking away anything that's key for what our tenants need to live well in our houses. It could be some aesthetic things, some facades. It could be, different materials. Like
Extensive balconies,
other things like that. But again, we're not just ditching all of that. We're looking at, what's a more fit for purpose of what our customers really need, that's going to get us back to that more market rate.
I can tell, on the bells and whistles, tell you my favourite little story about council consenting, which is the work that KO does is going to be really important, but we can help with some of this as well. So one of my little goals this year is to cut the red tape alongside Chris Peck as Building and Construction Minister around building houses in New Zealand. A lot of it is driven by council consenting. I can tell you a story about a social housing provider, not Kāinga Ora, but a smaller community housing provider that just wanted to build some apartments in Napier. And the council said, oh great, but you've got to put Juliet balconies on there. I didn't even know what a Juliet balcony was until I was told about this. It's a small little balcony. Sounds great. Do they look good? Yeah, they do. But guess what? That added, $30,000-$40,000 to the cost of that unit. As a result, the community housing provider delivered 2 fewer apartments than they otherwise would have been able to afford to build. Well, that's 2 fewer apartments that people can't be placed in who need a social house. Just as we can put some Juliet balconies on because the council demanded it. This sort of stuff is stupid. It's got to stop. And I'm really determined to sort it out. We do need design standards. We do need healthy homes regulations. But some of the crazy stuff you see from councils around the things that the urban designers demand from developers, including Kāinga Ora and including community housing providers, drives up the cost of housing, and that comes at the expense of affordability for Kāinga Ora or community housing providers or for people building a house or for market developers. So that's going to be one of my little focuses this year, is to try and sort that out.
I just think with this Kāinga Ora's very high debt levels and its debt track.
We've got the debt levels in the material we've released to you. So the deficit's reduced down to 510 million by 20. These are all forecasts. 510 by 27-28, which is a $354 million reduction in the deficit. In terms of the debt levels, the turnaround plan has debt peaking at $20.5 billion in 27-28, which is a reduction in debt forecast of around $1.8 billion compared to the pre-election update. It's a considerable improvement on the 2023 internal budget approved by Kāinga Ora as well before the change of government. So it's a balanced approach. Debt goes to about $20 billion, and the deficits reduce, but Kāinga Ora is going to continue to run a deficit into the forecast period. It's a balanced plan. As I say, the board looked at a whole range of, you can see it in the material we've released, the board looked and put to ministers a whole range of different options, from just maintaining and the stock reducing over time through to a big build path. We've taken essentially the middle option, which is a balanced approach that gets the organisation back to sustainability, means that we maintain the number of social houses owned by Kāinga Ora going over time, but also allows us to reinvest in those old units around the country that need that investment.
And so what you're saying is that the private sector is no better than the public sector?
Both the private sector and the public sector have an important role to play. In fact, they work together, because it's not like, Kāinga Ora contracts with the private sector to go and build houses. So,
built by signature
these were built by signature homes. So it's a bit like the public health system. GPs are, people talk about the public health system, but GPs are privately owned. GPs are sometimes sole traders or companies. Driving Miss Daisy, which ferries disabled people to and from hospitals, is a privately owned business. So the thing about New Zealand is it's a mixed economy, right? The public sector has an important role. Kāinga Ora owns 78,000 houses. That's really important. That is public money. The community housing sector does essentially public housing or social housing with government money So income-related rent subsidy is taxpayer funding for housing of people in need, and the private sector. Most New Zealanders will live in a home owned by most New Zealanders who own their homes will live in a home owned by themselves or the bank. Often, large chunks of it owned by Australian-owned banks. So the point is, we live in a mixed economy. Both the private and the public sector have a really important role to play in addressing our housing crisis. The question is, how do we optimise the planning settings and the fiscal settings and the regulatory settings designed to solve it? And as I always say when I visit Kāinga Ora developments, and I was at one on Monday last week in Apuni in my own electorate, we've all got a role to play in solving New Zealand's housing crisis. The government cannot do it by itself. And if I was to be critical of the previous government, I would say that was one of the areas where they went wrong, is they thought that the government could do it all. Actually, we can't. Most New Zealanders live in a home owned by the private sector. Most building activity in New Zealand is done by the private sector. The government has a really important role to play, but we need everyone working together. We need KO, we need the chips, we need the private sector, and most importantly, we need the communities that these people live in to look after people in social housing. So we all need to work together on solving this housing crisis. We can't do it by ourselves.
2 last questions, please, Mike.
Yes, you can. I'll deal with this, Matt.
Yeah, sure. So our staffing levels peaked in around, I think it was mid-24 at about 3,500. We're currently down to around 3,000 or a little bit below 3,000. So that's partly adjusting to volumes and partly driving through the kind of cost efficiencies that we've been looking for. And I've been really clear with my team, which is, every dollar that we waste or that we don't spend as efficiently and effectively as we can is a dollar that we're not spending on building and maintaining social homes and providing good services. So we're going to have to keep looking at that. As we focus in on the tighter scope, as we drive more cost efficiencies, there likely will be more job losses. Those aren't defined or specified at the moment. As we work through those, we'll be sharing those with our people first. But it's an imperative for us to keep looking at that.
Refocusing to sales, we talk a lot about sales. Is it shifting of job scopes within the next year?
No, we already had a divestments team, and that team is going to be managing it. Like, in the scale of where our people are focused, that's a relatively small part. The bigger part of it is actually engagement within the regional areas and local communities to actually identify what are the right places, where is there tenants that are going to be moving anyway, and getting all of that right. So it's a relatively small part of our organisation.
Just yesterday, staff was reading on a story 3 blocks that way. Up the hill about a Kāinga Ora property. 2 neighbours, one of them slammed his neighbour's door and armed the door and took boiling water over his face. It took 3 tenancy tribunal cases, all adverse findings, 6 months, and all the neighbours have complained about this guy, to get him out. How is Kāinga Ora actually going to improve its duties, its service as a landlord to people like Mr. Asiata up the road?
Yeah, so I won't comment on the specific one, but we're absolutely, one of the core parts of the plan is improved tenancy management. And part of that's being a good, supportive social landlord, but part of it's also being much clearer about the boundaries and policing to them around disruptive behaviour and around rent arrears, for example. We don't have any special powers as Kāinga Ora to be able to just remove people, so we have to follow the Residential Tenancy Act just like everyone else does. But what we are doing is being very clear about what the boundaries are and policing them more strongly, and you've seen some of those results coming through in the disruptive behaviour announcements that the Minister made a few weeks ago.
That's right.
Minister?
Well, I don't know the particular case, and I haven't been briefed on it, and I wouldn't want to comment on particular cases before the tribunal, but just in a general sense, sounds awful, obviously, and we've been really clear ministers have been really clear with Kāinga Ora that we expect behaviour when it comes to disruptive tenants, and they are doing that. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the organisation has been issuing, hundreds more Section 55A notices per the Residential Tenancies Act, and taking cases to the tribunal, far more so than in the past. We've made public comments around that, and we expect that to continue. But I can't comment on that particular case.
Broadly, could you offer insurance to neighbours of Kāinga Ora properties that they should be better served with that face disruption?
Yes, we campaigned on ending the sustaining tenancies approach, which we did soon after coming to office. We wrote a letter of expectation to Kāinga Ora, instructing them to end it and to take actions like the Chief Executive has been talking about, and they have been doing that. So we're making progress. I'm not pretending for a moment that everything is solved or that there won't continue to be cases, because at the end of the day we live in communities, and in the private rental market as well, there are sometimes problems with tenants. I always say to people, treat your neighbours like you would expect to be treated. If you do that, you can't go too far wrong. But we live in the real world. There'll continue to be incidents. What's important is that when there are, Kāinga Ora takes action, and they are doing that, and I back them to continue to do that. Okay.
Can I just ask you one last question? Are you and your team fully behind this plan? Are you happy with this change of approach?
Absolutely 100% supportive of this plan and the direction that it's taking us in. And look, as the Minister said, this is a really balanced one. Like we've needed to address these older homes for some time. So I know my team's actually quite excited about getting some consistency here where we can go do the renewals and retrofits to address some pretty ordinary old houses. And, these are still almost 2,000 build events a year, so it's not like we're sitting and twiddling our thumbs. This is a lot of work to do to deliver on this. The team's excited about it, I'm excited about it, and we're 100% behind this plan.
That issue of older homes and the need for one-bedroom homes and for safety and five-bedroom homes has been around for decades now. I remember the last national government talking about that as well. And that still hasn't been solved.
Yeah, I mean, the Sir Bill English review talks about this quite a bit. I mean, it dealt with the financial challenges of Kāinga Ora, but it also dealt with the wider housing system. I mean, the system's a mess. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we haven't really inherited, and it's not just from the last government, it goes back successive governments. We've inherited a mess. As I said a few minutes ago, the government spends $5 billion a year on housing subsidies. As I sometimes say to conferences, over a 4-year budget period, that's $20 billion. That's 12 transmission gully motorways on housing support in 4 years. That is 12 What's that? Yeah, but if the housing market, yeah, sure. And I'm not saying that money's not important, but in a functional housing market, the government would not be spending $4 billion a year just funneling money into housing. We would be spending money because, as I said before, there will always be a requirement for social housing. There will always be a requirement for some level of temporary emergency housing. There will always be a requirement to help some people with rental support, particularly seniors. No doubt about that. But in a functional housing market, we would not be spending as much money as we do. So that is one of the big drivers for our overall reforms, not just about today, but our overall reforms to fix the housing market and fix our housing crisis, is the fiscal cost to government is vast. And that comes at the expense of health and education and police and all the other things that the New Zealand government needs to spend money on. A lot of it is just literally funneling money into private sector landlords, funneling money into emergency housing, motels most recently. So if we had a functional housing market, New Zealanders would not be paying as much for their houses and not as much for their rent. But we don't have a functional housing market. That is why we are so determined to fix the housing crisis. So you're right. I mean, this is a problem that successive governments have grappled with. When it comes to the issue of 50% of people being on the wait list and only 12% of the units being one bedroom, we can solve that. And we're doing a lot of work at the moment around what we call active purchasing, which is an idea that came out of the Sir Bill English review, which is essentially, it's a fancy way of saying the government being really clear and deliberate around what it purchases, where it purchases it, and focused on customer need, which is quite different than focusing on an organisational need. So if you are guided by what our customers need and by what citizens and clients of Kāinga Ora need, you get quite different outcomes. So anyway, that's a little preview for what might be coming down the line. We're doing a bunch of work on it, but today's all about getting Kāinga Ora back on track. Thanks very much for coming. Cheers.